There are certain people that you just can't trust when they do certain things. And you probably know these people in your life. I know these people in my life. Sometimes you might be the person that is not worthy of being trusted. But there are certain people that do certain things that show you rather than tell you how they act. And when you see how they act and when you see the results of their actions, you start to realize, wait a second, maybe I should be very skeptical next time these people say something in my life. I mean, my best example is like, don't take advice from people that haven't actually done anything meaningful. So if someone says, hey, you can't do that, and you're like, well, have you ever done anything like that? And they're like, well, no, because I was blah, 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 whatever excuse. You're like, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be taking advice from you. So that is where we transition to Mr. Bill Ackman. Bill Ackman shorted the market in COVID 2020, went on CNBC, advocated for us to short the market. He has a very influential voice in the world of finance. Market tanks. He turns his $27 million short into a $2 billion gain. What does it mean to short the market? In a nutshell, it means if you bet that the stock market will go down, you will make money. If you are long the market or you're bullish on the market, you can put other types of hedging strategies where if the market goes up, you make even more money. So it is a strategy used to hedge your investments. And Bill Ackman is very famous for being an activist investor and shorting companies or shorting the market when he thinks that the market should deserve to go down. But he's not always transparent about telling us when he's shorting the market. And this thread today is what we're going to go through, and I'm going to give my thoughts on it because I honestly think it's quite despicable. So let's actually go through what is being said. Now, I'm not saying Bill Ackman is a horrible person, but this thread would make you think that he might be not the best person. In January 2020, I had nightmares about the potential for a pandemic, but everyone seems to think I was crazy. I am having similar nightmares now. World War III has likely started already, but we have been slow to recognize that Putin has invaded Ukraine and it is not going well. So first of all, anyone can say in January 2020 they had nightmares about the potential for a pandemic. I mean, like, I don't think I guess anyone can say that, but it's kind of hard because COVID and like December 2019, some of the news was coming up, but really February is when it started hitting hard. So like, January 29th, 2020, when there was a lot of data used, like, I think he's trying to seem like Nostradamus or something by saying this, but nonetheless, he's saying now, so that's the logic, right? I'm having similar nightmares now. He's trying to say, well, I was right in January 2020, so if I'm having similar nightmares now, then I'm definitely right? He's trying to use a little bit of reverse psychology there to get people to understand what his thought process is. And then he says World War III has likely already started. That is a big claim. I mean, that's a very big claim. Right now, there's a war going on between two other countries that are independent from NATO, from the United States. Ukraine is not part of NATO. Russia's not part of NATO. Russia is on its own. Ukraine is on its own. NATO's trying to help Ukraine, and there's a lot of components to that. But World War assumes the world is at war, and the world is not at war. World War III assumes that the United States has decided to put their boots on the ground wherever Russia is or China is, right? There's like a real match between two groups of people. That has not happened. So when he says Putin has invaded Ukraine, it is not going well. Yes, it is not going well. But to jump that says that means there's a world war, I think it's a little bit of a stretch. The Ukrainians have put up a remarkable resistance. NATO refuses to enter the war, but NATO members and most of the rest of the world have launched an economic war and are supplying Stingers, anti-tank weapons, other munitions, intelligence, and funding. Putin today declared these actions as acts of war against Russia. Now, Putin can say whatever he wants. That doesn't mean that it's a war. Like, we are putting sanctions on people. Have sanctions on North Korea. We're not at war with North Korea. So this, again, it's a little bit of a stretch. Yet there is much more we can do before we enter a hot war with Russia. We could stop the absurdity of buying oil from Russia and funding the war. Europe could follow suit once demands for glass decline in the spring. I agree. We should probably stop buying oil from Russia. We could supply Ukraine with our best weaponry and more of it. We could give them access to intelligence, which would enable them to better target the enemy. We could give them better drones and target and training to operate them. We don't need to put troops on the ground because the Ukrainians with the right weapons and resources have proven that they have what it takes to win the war until Putin goes nuclear. Our reason for not doing more appears to be our fear of provoking Putin. We have, however, already provoked Putin by giving the Ukrainians the weapons that are enabling them to succeed in this war. Because Russia is a nuclear power and Putin is a madman, we say we can't intervene in Ukraine. What do we do when he wants more? So here's where we have to analyze a little bit, and then we'll get back into the thread. What Bill Ackman is saying is that, look, we're saying we don't want to be in the war because we're afraid of Putin. Putin has nuclear weapons, and we want to kind of remain not neutral, but like we definitely don't want to mess with Putin because like messing with Putin is bad. He's an irrational person. What happens if he just launches a full-scale war? So he's saying, because of this fear, we are letting this guy get away with whatever he wants. We are letting thousands of and millions of civilians in Ukraine become refugees and ultimately lose their lives as a result of casualties because of this war. And because of us not doing anything about it, this is incredibly horrible for what's going on in Ukraine. His argument, as a result of all of this bad stuff that's happening, is that NATO needs to get involved. And probably one of the ways that NATO gets involved is set a no-fly zone over Ukrainian air. What does that mean? A no-fly zone means that if your fighter jet or your airplane or military jet starts flying over that no-fly zone that has been set in terms of the boundaries by the country that has set that fly zone, your fighter jet will get shot down. If we start shooting Russia jets down, that is a declaration of war. And that is basically what Ackman is trying to say. So he's using this logic that says, look, because we're so afraid of Putin, we should stop being afraid of Putin and actually start putting an end to the problems that are happening by just going and doing what we need to do. Now, he's saying we don't need to put boots on the ground, but we can do other things that would still enable some type of war. Whether it is a part of NATO or not, and by then we are strategically worse off. He has made his ambitions publicly known. Many of us make the mistake of pushing painful confrontations out into the future while knowing that the cost will inevitably escalate. So he's saying, look, let's not worry about like dealing with this later. Let's deal with this now. Let's get into the war now. We let Putin occupy Georgia and Crimea with little pushback. He's correct about that. And his aspirations only got larger because we did nothing to stop him. Are we now going to let him take the Ukraine? We are in the early innings of Putin's global aspirations. With each victory, he's emboldened to take more. This is where I disagree with Bill Ackman, because I don't believe that Putin is going to be able to take all of Ukraine. Now, I'm not a psychic on this, but I think there is a lot of ways in which you can diplomatically, especially through economic sanctions. I mean, if you look at Russia's currency, the ruble is like doubled in terms of its value, which is bad. So it went from like 73 rubles equaling $1 to 120 rubles equaling $1. The Russian economy is going to get hit. Most of the major companies have left Russia. Netflix is not even allowing you to stream in Russia anymore. Like, the Russian economy is not going to survive in this way. There are many, many different things we can do to stop Russia. Ackman is saying, hey, they got Crimea, they got Georgia. We'll get back into the thread in a second. The problem with that is Obama had the same logic in Crimea and Georgia. Were we going to go put boots on the ground in Crimea and fight Putin? Like, that's the thing I don't understand with a lot of people. If you put boots on the ground, you're saying you're going to fight. Are you ready to fight? And I don't think Obama wanted to get into a war with Russia. I don't think that's how he wanted his presidency to go down. I don't think any president wants to be in a war. We just got out of Afghanistan. So it's incredibly important to understand there are other ways to be able to deal with this situation, but Bill and Ackman is not really buying a lot of those different ways. He's saying that, look, Putin is a madman and we need to actually be able to do something about him, and saying that we have a war. NATO and Biden have refused to create a no-fly zone, what I just talked about above, and have said that we will not enter the war to defend Ukraine. Yet Biden has said that if Russia attacks a NATO country, we will intervene. By setting a hard line based only on NATO membership, doesn't this give Putin carte blanche to invade and subjugate a bunch of these countries, which were part of the former Soviet Union? Now, when he's saying this, it's a little bit disingenuous, because Article 5 of NATO says that when you attack one country, you attack all of us. So if they attack, like, I don't know, France or something, like the United States would obviously stand up because that's part of the entire NATO pact. I think it's actually a very strategically diplomatic thing for Biden to say this, because that means that Russia is not going to attack a NATO country. Like, that's the logic of it. That's why they've never attacked a NATO country, because they know they're messing with the U.S. And that gives the United States a little bit of flexibility, because Ukraine's not part of NATO, to also not have to intervene because NATO's getting attacked. And the result of that is that means we don't get into a war, right? Now, this is why people have been saying Ukraine should be part of NATO for a long time, but that's also why Russia gets so upset every time you try to put, or every time the thought project, or not Russia, Putin gets so upset every time you put the idea out there that Ukraine should join NATO, because then he doesn't have a chance to intervene if Ukraine's a part of NATO. Well, why doesn't he have a chance to intervene? Because then the United States says we're going to attack, and he does not want the United States to attack. So Ackman is saying, doesn't this give Putin the ability to subjugate all these other countries? And my argument here is that, yes, he has the ability to do this. It is very unlikely he's able to do this, because if you can barely get Ukraine, which it's looking like he's not going to be able to do because their economy is going down the absolute gutter and no one's buying anything from them anymore, and people can't watch Stranger Things on Netflix anymore at Netflix, then it's very unlikely that you can just invade 7 other democracies and just take, like, that's not an easy thing to do, which is why Ackman's entire ideas are in this thread that we're going to get into around starting a world war make very, very little sense, because you're ignoring all the diplomatic and economic ways where we can actually stop this, and you're essentially fear-mongering. What if instead using rockets to kill civilians, Putin used gas chambers? Would that change our willingness to intervene? Why should it matter what type of weapon is used to kill civilians? Is there a threshold number that how many must die? We should do. What would we do if Putin's next stop was Sweden and he started killing civilians? Should we differentiate among non-NATO countries in our willingness to intervene? Our reluctance to intervene likely comes from the fact that many of us think think of Ukraine as a part of Russia because it used to be, and many Westerners have never been there. When I was a child and learned about the Holocaust, I asked my grandparents why they didn't do more to save millions of people during genocide in World War II. They didn't have very good answers. What will we say to our grandchildren when they ask us how tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of millions of Ukrainians were dying? I hope we are all around to answer these questions. The better the defense of the Ukrainians put up, the more aggressive the Russians become. This has put us on a path to become a very bad place because the Ukrainians are bravely prepared to fight to the death. We have seen indiscriminate shelling of apartment blocks and civilians. It is only going to get worse. We need to use every economic sanction and give the Ukrainians every weapon they need to defend itself in order to deter Russia from future aggression. Last couple parts. The time for holding back sanctions and armaments has ended. The more painful this is for Putin and the Russian people, the less willing he is to try this again. If Putin efforts fail, and we will know very soon, we need to reconsider a no-fly zone and further NATO military intervention because of the Ukrainians' capable military. Fortunately, don't need to send troops to help them succeed. All of this stuff, at the end of the day, there's a lot more stuff here. Just basically says, look, we need to do more and get militarily involved. And look at the first couple of retweets. Your alarmism is quite self-serving typically. World War III would end in 2 days and we would win. Don't be confused, silly hedge fund guy. Okay, that's kind of funny coming from Ross Gerber. I don't know if we would win in 2 days. But this is the main tweet that I care about. What are you short this time? I mean, what is Bill Ackman short or what is he long? Because when you go on CNBC and turn 27 million into 2 billion, and you have all this fear-mongering around the pandemic, and you advocate that everything should be closed down and people should lose their businesses and all this stuff should happen, which, by the way, maybe it was the right move, maybe it wasn't right the move, but like you have a level of influence and you're propagandizing those thoughts out there. People listen and people, sell their stocks. If Bill Ackman is selling his stocks, right, it has a level of influence. See, this guy manages a lot of money. So when you're saying, hey, we should get into a war, and the economic sanctions are not enough, and you're like, well, what if Putin does all this and stuff, and like how many people have to die, blah, blah, blah. Like all the concerns he's bringing up are very valid, but he's not taking into account two main things. Number one, if the United States gets into war with Russia, there is likely going to be something for the potential for things to go nuclear. Why? Because we did the Cold War already. That's when we were testing nuclear weapons. We're getting it all ready until the next kaboom starts to happen. We don't want the next kaboom to happen because if it does happen, all of us are stocked and ready to go with our nuclear weapons. And there is many nuclear simulation videos you can watch on YouTube. It doesn't end well. People die. So that's the first thing. If the United States enter into a war, Russia can go nuclear because Russia has the capability to go nuclear in a world in which, in a time in which it didn't have other capabilities to go nuclear in the past. Second of all, and this is the really important part. If the United States decides to bypass all of the other ways that we can stop a war from happening, like the economic the economic sanctions, like all the different companies leaving Russia and just decimating their economy. There's just a bunch of different ways in which we're stopping Russia's ability to become more aggressive by just like crippling their ability to act, and go straight into war. We are doing the exact same thing we've done in the past. We've never learned our lesson. Like, this is what we did with Afghanistan. This is what we did with it. Like, instead of just like heavily hurting all of these other countries in economic ways, we went in and millions of people lost their lives. And the question here is, can you trust someone saying this? Because what is he short? What companies are going to get hurt by a war that he's going to make profit off of because we got into a war? And then what companies is he going to make a lot of money off? What defense contractors does he have a lot of options on in terms of, call options where he's going to be able to make a lot of money? The reason I'm bringing this up is because you can't trust someone that has had a horrible reputation for being short or long certain parts of the market and then only coming to Twitter when it is, part of your agenda to get on Twitter and then put all these thoughts out there. Like, that's when he doesn't tweet for fun. He's not like me tweeting 10,000 times a day. I like tweeting. Definitely check me out on Twitter @AmitIsInvesting. But he just tweets when he has this huge thread to put out and he has a lot of influence. So he put out this huge thread saying that, look, we need to do all this stuff. And the question is, how are you going to benefit from it? And I wish, he would really disclose and explicitly say he's not going to benefit from any of this stuff. And because he's an active investor, and he's done this in the past for some companies he was short, like Herbalife, when he was trying to prove they're an MLM scam, he was explicit. He was like, look, this is what I'm short long, and here's how much money I would make or not make. He even said if he wins in his position being short Herbalife, he will donate all the money to charity. So he was like, literally, I have no incentive here. But now it's like, well, you didn't disclose what companies you're long or short, but you're writing this whole diatribe of like all this stuff that leads to a world war, which is not good. Like, a world war is not good. Saying we're already in a world war is not good. And here's my final thing I'm going to say. If you're not ready to die for your country and put boots on the ground and leave your nice hedge fund office, leave my nice little studio in my parents' house, and go fight for my country, I think you are the last person to advocate for a war. Because while Bill Ackman is in his nice little NYC studio managing funds on a computer, there's people actually going to be going to Ukraine and Russia to fight. Like, those people will lose their lives potentially, and you're just going to be playing with options on your computer, day trading commodities while that's happening. I don't think Bill Ackman or any of us should be advocating for a war. I think this is just pretty objective if we're not willing to go fight in that war. Because in a war, people die. And it's like, if you're not ready to go die, then you probably shouldn't be, ready to just be like, let's just go to war. Things can get worse in a war. Nuclear potentials are possibilities. It's sad to see what's happening in Ukraine and people die, but then from a utilitarian perspective, you're like, well, if we go into a war, more people die. So like, from one moral side of your head, you're like, well, it's better to have less people die than more people die. And if things go nuclear, the entire world dies. So it's like, it just doesn't make any sense at that point, other than providing as many resources as we can and actually sanctioning the crap out of this country to make sure that they can't continue to have an economy, which will ultimately cripple them and hopefully allow them to lose the war. But advocating to go to a World War III because you probably are going to make profits off of it, which is likely going to happen given we know how Ackman is, probably not the best move. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Not the best look on Ackman, but nonetheless, I mean, money drives the world, right? And I guess sometimes money is more important than human life, because that's what it seems like. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.